Welcome to Stranger Encounters. Today's guest is an educational and future of thought leader as well as a serial entrepreneur. And I had to say that. I love that word. He has founded and co-founded multiple businesses in the construction, food service, fitness, real estate, and online education industries. He's also the founder of Successful Dropout, a podcast and community you should probably check out. He's been featured in BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and The Tab. Kylon Geinger. Hey, Kylon.
Tommy, it's good to be on the show, man. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm excited. I love the term serial entrepreneur. I got to get more of them on here just so I can keep saying that.
Yeah. I guess I'll accept the term. Yeah, it makes sense.
I had Alex Merced on here, and that's one of the things I had to say about him. He's a serial entrepreneur, and I was like, this is just awesome. I got a serial something.
Yeah. I guess. I mean, for myself personally, starting all these businesses in different industries, I think you can call it that. I'm not always sure, like, it's the best thing because I look to my right and to my left, and some of my friends and other people in my network. They started one business back when they were 18, 19 years old. And, 10 years later or so, it's a multi-million-dollar business whereas I've started a lot of, smaller, like 6-figure businesses here and there that, are still around. But, I find myself thinking about that. If I hadn't have jumped around so much in the last decade or something to these different industries, like what would just starting one business look like versus all these other ones? Because, now I can call myself a serial entrepreneur, and, I think it's a win-win either way. I personally don't regret any of it at all. I've experienced a lot of different things, in a lot of different industries, and I've tried. I can truly say I can look back on my life and say I've tried and tasted and experimented with, built something within everything I've ever been interested in. No regrets there. So I am very proud of that.
I think there are much worse pathologies that you could have involved yourself with.
True.
So. Well, I've heard a little bit about the beginning of your story, and I remember you talking about how you got started as an entrepreneur, and it actually resonated well with me because I grew up in a blue collar house. Okay, so it was all about hands-on work. No matter what you did, it was hands-on work, and I ended up following that path up to date. And though we're trying to change some things, that's where I'm at. And when you've spent so much of your time doing that, it makes it a little bit hard to break those habits and those chains. But I thought it would be interesting to let you kind of give a background on how you became an entrepreneur and what your first businesses were.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it definitely was. It wasn't a very straightforward path, let me put it that way. And, blue collar work, I respect that to no end. I grew up from 12 years old into my teens, working on a large ranch in Idaho. It was my grandparents' ranch, so I'd head out there every single summer. We grew alfalfa, raised steers, had horses. And so I learned how to ranch, I learned how to farm, and learned how to get up early and work till the sun went down. And it's some of the best memories I have, man. And nothing like farming, several hundred acres and being out in the middle of freaking nowhere on a tractor, and it breaks down, and I'm 14 years old trying to figure out how to fix this thing. Just very, very valuable experiences. So I have a lot of respect for that. And then actually my very first job, I shouldn't say my first job, but one of my first jobs was just working in construction. My first business was a residential commercial painting company that, we later became a general contractor. And so major respect for all of that. But I would say my story probably begins with, I was homeschooled most of my life. And so I think that allowed me to really think outside of the box quite a bit. We grew up in the mountains in a cabin. My dad worked from home. Like I said, my mom homeschooled us. And so I was just really close with my family, had a lot of free time to explore my natural curiosities and interests, and just generally a lot more freedom than I think my peers had. And I ended up going to more of a formal private high school my sophomore and my senior year. And that was a great experience because, homeschoolers tend to have this stigma of being quite awkward, like socially, and not really in tune with pop culture, all those things. And luckily I was able to avoid that by just proactively wanting to get involved in some more, I guess, traditional networks and group settings and stuff. And so, that was great. And then, of course, the next natural step after that was to go to college. And so I enrolled, after I graduated high school, enrolled in my local community college there. And it wasn't more than a few months in that I realized, man, this is not for me. And I don't quite know why I don't like this so much. But I just know I was paying for it out of pocket too. It just was not for me. I looked to my right and to my left and saw this classroom full of people that I was roughly going to be the average of. And yeah, I'm a pretty like A-type personality. And, my general attitude towards life is, find a way or make one. And this just didn't seem like a trajectory that I wanted. And I remember very specifically, I was taking a marketing class because it was just something I was interested in. And we had our textbook, and I remember the textbook being like 9 years old. It was pretty outdated. And even I realized, and this was back, when like smartphones, for instance, were just becoming a thing, and social media, MySpace, all that stuff. And I knew, like, man, marketing has changed quite a bit since this book came out. And I remember talking to my professor, and she had never had a marketing firm, never had worked in a business. Like, she was basically just reading off the textbook. And I was like, what am I paying for? I could just go home and read this textbook, which is outdated. Half this information doesn't matter anyways. And basically get the same experience that I'm paying, hundreds of dollars for. In this one particular class. And so it just didn't make sense. And so I remember dropping out. A lot of my peers were like, what the heck are you doing? But I knew I would kind of figure it out at some point. And so the next thing that I ended up doing, I was actually really heavily involved in my local church and in ministry. I had been for years. My whole family was really involved. And so I actually got a job, like a salaried position at my local church as their youth pastor. I was like 19 years old. And so that was an incredible opportunity. And I had to, sell myself into that one, but ended up doing really well there. And we really grew, the youth group. And that was just a great experience to prepare me for entrepreneurship, I think, because in that sort of situation, like in ministry, particularly, you're working with volunteers. You're not paying everybody that you're working with. And so you really have to learn how to cast a vision, execute on a vision, motivate people and delegate, and have people be excited about this and want to put forth, like, you don't have the carrot and stick, I guess, of firing somebody in their salary, right? And so you really have to learn to be, I guess, an inspiring leader. And so that really prepared me a lot. Did that for 2 years, ended up getting married at about 21 years old, which led me, I just basically took a break from ministry. And since, kind of a tangent, but since my beliefs, and I'm a pretty like skeptical, like logical person, and so my beliefs have changed quite a bit. We don't need to go into that, but ended up getting married, and I had always wanted to enlist in the military. And so I got married, I got a job as just a construction grunt, and I trained nonstop. But when I wasn't working, I was training like 4, 5, 6 hours a day. I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. That had been my dream ever since I was 12, is the earliest I can remember. I had watched a documentary on the Discovery Channel, and so it's weird timing, I know, to like get married and then want to pursue something like that. But my wife is amazing, of course, and she'd kind of known about it since we'd been dating. And so I trained really hard, worked as a construction grunt basically to pay the bills. Ended up getting my SEAL contract, got into the Navy, went through boot camp, went through pre-buds, went through buds. And again, long story short, because there's just a lot of detail there, ended up getting injured and getting a medical discharge. One of the toughest moments of my life, man, because it was a dream that I had put, basically 3 years of my life towards, just put everything on hold to be able to pursue this, and it ended up not panning out. So it was a major lesson, and just a kind of a school of hard knocks lesson to learn, and a real bummer for a while. But at this point, we were stationed in Pensacola. I'd just gotten out of the Navy. I knew I wanted to move back home to Washington State, but I had no idea what I was going to do. One of my best buddies growing up gave me a call. He said he wanted to start a painting company, but he needed $1,000 for a van and some tools basically to get started. And so I gave him basically half of what I had in savings in return for 50% of the company he was going to start. And we went in as partners, started a residential commercial painting company, had zero idea what we were doing, like how to paint, how to run a business. I mean, I'd done a little in construction, but basically zero idea of what we were doing. And so, huge learning curve. But over the next 4 years, we grew that company pretty substantially, grew it internationally. We were doing work all over the U.S. And we started to specialize in painting, really large apartment complexes and landing those sorts of contracts. And in the course of running that company, this guy's still my best friend, still my business partner. We ended up building a hot yoga studio and a juice bar, so 2 kind of retail locations in a commercial building we bought and remodeled with the construction company in our city of Yakima, Washington here. And we brought our wives in as partners on those, actually my sister too, and all that's still running. And so I did that for several years, ended up selling my half of the painting company to my partner because I wanted to move into more of the online direction and get away from more the brick and mortar and service-based businesses. I promise we're getting to the end of the story here. Like I told you, it bounces around, quite a bit, man. There's a lot, but from there, I flipped houses for quite a while just to basically make cash. And I love real estate, and, with all the construction background and connections, knew what I was doing there and got some good deals done. And in the meantime, was busy working on several different online projects. And so I tried all sorts of stuff, man. 2 of the biggest ones were I built like this really extensive online course for small business owners to basically systematize their business so it works more for them and they work less for it. And I learned a valuable lesson in basically I disappeared into my office for like 3 months, built this shiny new thing, brought it out to the world, and nobody wanted it. And so I learned a valuable lesson in sort of the lean startup concept and, actually gaining feedback from people before you really put a lot of time and effort and resources into building a solution for their problems. I did Amazon FBA for a while. That was profitable, but I really didn't like it. It didn't pan out for a lot of different reasons. And eventually, landed on, I'd been listening to John Lee Dumas for a couple of years, and the guy really inspired me. And I'd always wanted to start a podcast. And so, long story short, ended up starting the Successful Dropout podcast and interviewing people like myself that had dropped out of college, become entrepreneurs, and become really successful at it, and pulled all these amazing guests out of the woodwork and got them on the show and got them interviewed. And we ended up getting featured on BuzzFeed, and that really started the ball rolling, and we built a whole community out of it. And in fact, where I'm at today, which is I am CEO of one of the largest affiliate marketing firms in the world currently, and then CEO and co-founder of another affiliate marketing related business, but this time applying crypto and blockchain to the industry. What I'm doing today is a direct result of starting that podcast. It was one of the first it was the very first interview I ever did on that show that led to a relationship and a whole network that got me involved with all the things I'm at today. So that all brings me to basically today, which is I'm 28. I'm going to turn 29 here in just a couple of days. My wife and I have been married 8 years. We have a dog. Her name's Sif, and we live up in our dream location here in the mountains of Washington State on a lake. And both of us pretty much work from home full time, and just for all intents and purposes, living the dream. I mean, we still have a long ways to go, and we've definitely stared at bankruptcy, a couple times in the process of getting here, but worked very hard at it, and just like I said previously, just zero regrets. So that's the whole story not really a nutshell, but that's the whole story.
Okay, well, there's a lot there, and I think you mentioned putting together this course for small businesses and how to help them, get off the ground. And I think one of the things that is where a person has to learn the most, and I'm not sure if this is you, but I know it's one of the things I have to look at really closely, is whenever somebody wants to go into business for themselves, it's usually because they are tired of dealing with other people and the way that other people work and the other people messing things up, and they just feel like they can be more successful on their own. So at some point when growing a small business, you have to learn to let go of those leashes and let somebody else take control of certain projects and certain situations. How did you go from a one van crew of painters to an international success that was actually employing other people? How did you change that mindset? How did that frame in your mind?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think at the end of the day for us, there wasn't a lot of, in the very beginning, there wasn't a lot of premeditated like systemization or like strategic thinking. There was some, but not as much as there should have been. Really, it all came about as a necessity. We wanted to grow the company. We wanted to make more money essentially, and just have our company encompass a larger footprint in the world. And so it just came as a necessity. It started out with just myself, my business partner. I still remember the day, the first job we drove to together. We bought our van. We borrowed like $900 from his brother too to buy it, and I don't think we've ever paid him back. We had just some of the most basic tools, and it was just us, for a while, driving around painting these jobs. And but pretty soon there just became like there's more and more opportunities. So instead of one house to paint this week, we've got 2 or 3 houses to paint. Okay, well we obviously can't do that, so we need to hire help. So we'd put an ad on Craigslist or something, which we ended up getting fined for because we were advertising without actually having a contracting license. So like there was one early lesson learned. We'd put an ad on and find somebody that could paint and basically hire them. And we found an accountant that, could work all those details out that we had no idea like what we were doing. And sorry, can you hear my dog?
Yeah, no, I can, but I'm waiting on I got my 2 are sitting here in the office with me, and when my wife gets home, they're going to go ballistic, so don't feel bad.
Okay. Yeah, we can cut that part out, but so we for instance hired an accountant that did all that stuff that we didn't know how to do. And like, keep in mind, we made a lot of mistakes. Like, constantly making mistakes, but all those mistakes, if you can learn from them, they just become those stepping stones to success, right? And I would say a lot of this too, I prefer actually to work with business partners, and that's a huge reason why I'm able to be involved in as many different businesses as I am and as I have been, is because I have business partners. And with a business partner, yes, it's tricky because there's been several times, man, like we've been at each other's throats and it's gotten pretty brutal. But if you can be friends, like put the friendship first, and these are people like we grew up with, so the very similar values and all that stuff, that's a plus. It can really be a huge benefit because you can tackle 2, 3, 4 times as much as you can by yourself. And so that was a major blessing. But really it all just came out of necessity. And then it's like, yeah, there's this job opportunity in, what was the first one? In Indiana, this big apartment complex, giant contract. And so we go over there, we bid it, we end up winning it. And then it's like, well, shoot, like we have to figure out a way to get this done. So it's like we're calling other painters that have larger businesses and picking their brains and asking them like, what do they do? And just figuring out. And we made some really, really stupid mistakes. I remember on that first big job, like for instance, we packed all of the materials and paint that we needed for this giant apartment complex job and drove them from Washington State to Indiana to give to all these subcontractors that we'd hired to do the job, when there's like Sherwin-Williams and all the, like we could have just drove there or flown there and bought all the materials there. It's like, it's such stupid stuff when you look back now, but we were just figuring it out, and it was all out of necessity. And pretty soon when you've got a larger team you're working with, you realize, we have to have some organization, or people don't know where they're supposed to go during the day, or this person is over here representing our company this way with a customer, and this person is doing the exact opposite, and we're not being consistent here. So what sort of system do you need in place there? Do we need to have like weekly team meetings? And it's just figuring it all out as you go. And what I think is the most important thing is, we just had a hunger and a drive to keep growing and do better. And I know there's a lot of small business owners out there that they start a business and it's doing well, it's paying the bills, maybe growing a little bit, and they're totally satisfied with that. And that's great, frankly, it really is. But my ambitions and my business partners were much larger than that. And so even though we got to the point eventually where we had a business that was paying the bills and it was substantial, it was like, no, we want more. We want to eventually build 7-figure companies and more than that. So we just have to keep pushing and keep figuring it out. And so you just end up figuring out a lot of this stuff, really by necessity, I think.
I think a big thing that people don't realize, and growing up, I was always pretty ambitious. I never have liked working for other people. I put myself in some situations where I had to make some tough choices, and working for other people was probably the most secure way to go about it. But besides the security aspect of it, another thing I realized here recently that I wasn't prepared for was the way that entrepreneurs view money. And it's a completely different way of viewing money than your typical employer or employed worker. I'm sorry. Whereas an employed worker is looking to get that paycheck to make those bills and then maybe have something left over to do something fun with. An entrepreneur is putting the investment into future capital before the bills. So if some of the bills fall short, that's fine, but the investment never falls short. You're always on top of that investment. Did your parents prepare you for that? Was your dad working for home? Did that prepare you for that? And how much of a shock was it whenever you started doing it? How difficult was it to make it a habit, to make sure that you were prioritizing the business before all the personal stuff?
It's a fantastic question, man. And yeah, for me, it's been a real learning experience. My parents they did an okay job with me, I would say, preparing me, to handle money and to build wealth, let's say. They did a way better job with my siblings. They got it figured out after, I'm the oldest, so I'm the guinea pig, right? So after I left the house, they really got it figured out. And I'll just go over it really quick, because for anybody listening who say, you have kids or something, this was a revolutionary idea. I'm going to do it with my kids, and it's phenomenal. But my parents, instead of they stopped paying for basically everything for my siblings. They stopped paying for my siblings' clothes, for any extracurricular activities. If they went out to eat, they stopped paying for them at restaurants. Basically, all my siblings could count on was a meal and a bed, if they lived at home, right? And instead, my parents paid them a monthly salary, pretty much. That gave them enough money to cover all these things, and they helped them come up with these systems for budgeting and for tracking this money. And so basically, instead of paying for stuff for my siblings, they just gave them the money and then taught them how to manage that money. So like my brother, for example, growing up, my little brother, he got paid, say when he was, 10 years old or something, maybe only a couple $100s a month or so. And so he had to budget in all the appropriate categories for clothes if he wanted to buy them, for, we love to snowboard. So for like snowboarding gear, during the season, and for eating out when we go out with friends or family, he had to budget for all that. And there would be some months when he would want some new cool airsoft gun or something that would cost like $100. So he would blow, half of his budget on that. And the next time we'd be out to eat, it's like he wouldn't have the money to pay for it. And so, and to be truthful, like my parents they wouldn't let him starve or anything or be that embarrassed in front of his friends. But there would be a real learning experience there. It'd be like, yeah, we'll pay for your meal, but you understand this is a big deal. You messed up. You don't have the money to pay for this. That's a big deal. Versus my sister, who I think was a little bit more careful with saving her money. So she got an allowance, and she figured out different ways to save and cut costs here and there on her personal expenses, and ended up saving up enough money by the time she was 18 to just buy a car, like full out. She had that much savings. And so with them, by the time they transitioned into adulthood and now they're all living on their own, there was like no difference. Like it was a very natural transition. So for me, I didn't have a lot of bad experiences. There's at one point I put way too much on a credit card and was paying that plus interest for like a year when I was younger, but besides that, yes, as an entrepreneur, you quickly learn to think about money. Money isn't this thing that you're always chasing so you can pay your bills and buy fun stuff. Like money is a tool. Money is a resource, and it's a very, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, that's not the right word, but it's a very sort of finicky resource. If you've got to pay very close attention to it and where it's all going. And I'm pretty good with attention to detail, and so I'm very good with that. So for years, I've been using the same spreadsheet to track all our personal finances. And I track every source that we have money coming in. I track every source, or, every instance where money is leaving. I track the balance, between those two. And we make future decisions, based off of essentially this pretty elaborate spreadsheet that I've created, basically out of necessity. Because as an entrepreneur, you never know where your next paycheck is coming from. There's months where we went without paying ourselves, and then you get, one lump sum or something like that. And then you've got to spread that out and make that last 6 months. So you quickly learn to budget and basically to, I call it pre-spend your money months in advance. And, even to this day, if anybody's familiar with Dave Ramsey, I don't agree with everything he kind of preaches, but, we use his cash envelope system. To this day, like 8 years married, we withdraw a certain amount of cash every single month for all of our expenses, and we categorize that cash and basically, quote unquote, pre-spend it put it in these physical envelopes and carry it around. We pay cash for things as much as possible. We still use credit card and debit, here and there for like reoccurring bills and stuff. But for like gas, food, all that stuff, we use actual cash, and that's been very helpful. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of the money that we've made from our businesses just goes right. We put it right back into the business for growth, and view that as a tool. And so when I get, $10,000, let's say, I don't look at this like, I've learned to look at it as like, oh my gosh, this means we can survive like for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months now, this will pay the bills. I don't look at it as like, oh, now I can go buy like a new car, a truck or something. It's like, we have this much of this resource. How can we use it to generate more, to create more value in order to get more value from people. And I remember a fun way to think about money is, there was a guy named Jesse Elder that was on the Successful Dropout podcast, and he said something that's really stuck with me. He's like, where does money come from? And I was like, what's your answer? And he was like, he's like, this might sound kind of stupid, but money comes from other people's bank accounts. And I mean, it's really rudimentary, I guess, but it's interesting to think about that when you think like all of the money that you have has come from other people's bank accounts. And so how do you get that money? You need to provide value to people. And money is it's like a certificate that you receive in return for that value. It's a certificate that says like, I've provided a certain amount of value to this person. And so when you start to think about money in terms of that, and be smart with your budgeting and be very, very intentional. And like, I know even sitting here right now where every single dollar that I own is, and how it's working and where it's going and where it's coming from. That's all in my head. It's all on a spreadsheet. And when it takes some intentionality, like you got to really focus on this stuff, but pretty soon it becomes second nature. And I would say that it's just an essential skill for any entrepreneur, any business owner. You've got to learn how to manage money and how to basically, build wealth, I would say.
Yeah. And that's a perfect way of putting it. And I was going to go to that here in a second, build wealth, because the money you may have in your possession is finite, but it's not a finite resource. Like you can, I think it was Jason Stapleton. I brought his name up before we started recording here, but he started a business when he was in Afghanistan. He was in the special forces, and when he was in Afghanistan, he started a currency trading business. And he read a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but one of the things that he points out, and that's pointed out in the book, is that the employee is a slave to money. And what the entrepreneur is doing is making their money a slave to them. And so it's two different ways, like I said, of viewing money, but it's also two different ways of using money. If you're using money to survive, or you can use money to thrive and create more money, almost like you're planting a seed.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I would also argue, because I know there's probably a lot of people listening that are employees, and I've been an employee. I would argue it doesn't have to be that way, even if you're an employee. I mean, simply all you need to do is live well below your means. I mean, if you're making $6,000 a month, figure out a way to live off of $3,000 a month and save the rest and put it into appreciating assets, put it into real estate, or heck, just save it up for a while. Definitely at least get like an emergency fund saved up and like a 6 months runway saved up for paying your bills in case something goes south. Like you can definitely, you can definitely do this as an employee as well. But yeah, that being that slave to money, that's such a true concept. I mean, I can say we So I'll say this. I've said it on Stephen Worley's podcast too. I don't mind saying it. My wife and I, since we've been married, through all the stuff we've done, our bills have never exceeded, like our total cost of living every month to month has never exceeded more than like $3,000, like even to this day. And our resources and our income has grown, well beyond that at this point, but we still live at this baseline because, we don't have kids. There's a lot of things and of course we take trips and we'll do stuff that does cost more. But if we're just normal routine at home, we're talking like 3,000, maybe 35, $100 at this point. And, that's pretty intentional because I think even though we're nearing 30 here, we're still in a stage of growth and building, our assets. And honestly, we're also sort of minimalist. It doesn't take much to keep us happy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If I got $5 million cash, tax free in my bank account tomorrow, my lifestyle would not change. It really wouldn't. I would buy like maybe a couple fun toys or something like that. But besides that, our lifestyle just wouldn't change at all. And that's very, very intentional. Whereas you notice a lot of people, the more they make, the more they spend. And so they never widen those margins, I guess, between, what they make and what they spend, because it's a natural inclination, I think, as human beings. If you're making a bunch of money, money buys things, money, gives you that, instant gratification. And so you just want to go out and spend it. And then at the end of the day, gosh, dude, I know people that are in their, 60s and 70s, that just have zero retirement plan and they're still working paycheck to paycheck. And I just don't let yourself get into that situation.
Right. Well, and like I said earlier, I had to make some choices. I made some choices that put me in a situation where I had to make some hard decisions. And one of those decisions, that I had to make was to not start a retirement plan when I was young. That was one thing I maybe I could have done it, in some way, shape, or form, but it didn't seem like a viable option to me because I wasn't even living paycheck to paycheck. I was living overdrawn account to overdrawn account. You know what I'm saying? It got bad. It was bad there for a while. Yeah. And what I always said was, as my kids get older, and start getting out of the house, my eldest he's now 20. I'm 39. And, as they get older and get out of the house, then I am going to have to be my retirement plan. I'm going to have to start investing in myself and investing in my life and investing in my future in a different way and become, more independent, in a different way than whether it's a 401k plan or however, whatever other retirement plans you have. But so what we've started doing is we've started investing in ourselves, as far as like me starting the podcast and using this as a platform for different things. And then my wife is starting her own business, right? So this is where our money's going at the moment. So any extra money we have, this is where we put it. We have the money we live on to pay our car note and to pay the house and insurance and yada, yada, yada. We eat, but we don't gorge ourselves. And, and then we have our little relaxation time. And then every additional dollar, every time we make a little bit more money, it's going in, being invested into trying to create something bigger for both of us in the future. And so we've had to take kind of a different route. And I definitely don't want to see kids, growing up, go through the same things I went through, and going through the same struggles. So it's really important that money is a conversation that be had in the public arena.
Yeah, well, and to be clear here, like in terms of retirement funds and stuff, we have zero. We don't have any 401k or anything like that. I mean, maybe we should. I don't know. I don't really care at this point. Like, I'm thinking more, it's what you're talking about. It's investing in different assets, whether that's a business or real estate, or something that is going to appreciate in value, ideally in the long term, without a lot of I guess intensive input from you long term. I think that's where it's at. And so, like me, I don't tend to, I don't think about, I think retirement like a lot of people do. I tend to think more of the Tim Ferriss, 4-hour work week style, which, you can take or leave a lot of the concepts in that book. I personally think that it's ridiculous to expect to be rich and only work 4 hours a week. I love to work because I love the work I do. It's as simple as that. And I expect to work until I'm in the grave, because I know I'm always going to be working on really interesting things that I'm genuinely curious about and that have a lot of a high upside. And so retirement for me is having as much freedom as possible throughout, my entire life. So being able, for instance, my transition to working more online, my wife and I were just able to take off, and I had some business in Barcelona and in Berlin last month. And so we ended up stacking a 33 day trip around these two business engagements I had. And we worked for like 6 hours a day, but we love the work we do. But we were able to travel all around Europe, stay in Airbnbs, work at local cafes and stuff just on our computers. And so it was like a workcation, it felt like retirement, but we're still working, we're still building things. And so that's the kind of lifestyle I'm after, I guess. And so if you do get even into the like 60, 70-year-old range or something like that, and you don't have some savings account somewhere with $1 million, but say you've spent your time putting your income into these assets, and say you own a couple pieces of real estate that you could sell for $1 million. I mean, that's the same thing in my mind, but I guess that's the way I tend to think about it. I don't, there's all sorts of ways to cut corners, man, and like cut through the system and play a different game. People, like, gone are the days when you can expect to go to college, get a 4-year degree, jump into a career and stay in that career for like 30 or 40 years, save up a bunch of retirement, and then, retire for years. I mean, it's with technology and everything, and you talk to somebody like, again, Stephen Worley, the skills that matter, life skills that matter, podcast. The work landscape is changing so much. There's very few careers out there that you can expect to do that anymore. You're going to have to learn how to adapt and practice just-in-time learning. And so there's that. You can't expect that anymore. In terms of like Social Security, like, I'm sure you've got all sorts of opinions, on this. Like, that's probably not going to be around much longer. I wouldn't rely on that. And retiring, like, if you just decide to retire and for the last 10, 20 years of your life or something, just sit in a couch and watch TV and not work and keep yourself busy, like, it's not going to be 10, 20 years. It's going to be like 5, 6, 7 years. Like, you'll die earlier than if you just stay busy and keep active and keep on working on interesting things. And so it's just a whole paradigm shift that I think people need to accept and really take on, because it's just going to be a lot more beneficial, thinking this way, I guess. I think that's important. Kind of another case in point here is, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's important, though. Like, people look at retirement and they think about retirement a specific way, and it's not working. Well, it's not the working part that's the problem. It's what you're doing for a living that's the problem. If you're doing something that you enjoy and something that gives your life meaning, you're going to live a much healthier life. You're going to be more healthy. You're going to be healthier psychologically and physically, because you're not going to be so stressed out. You're not. So I think people get this idea of retirement misconstrued, because I say the same thing as you. They're like, people are like, when do you want to retire? I'm like, I don't want to retire. I just want to do what I want to do. You know, I want to earn money the way I want to earn money. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should strive to end up doing work that you never want to retire from. I mean, to
Right.
me, retirement is such a strange concept to me. And I'm kind of proud of myself because it didn't used to be, but now even just thinking about it, it's like I think it's ridiculous to think that way. Like retirement for me is the same as just like quitting a job or something. It's like you hate what you do so much that you want to stop it and not do it for the rest of your life. You know, it's like I never want to be in that position. I always want to be heading towards things that I want to do for the rest of my life, and I never want to retire from, right? I mean, of course, like you want to get to the point where, yeah, if you decide, like you could take off to Hawaii for a few days and not work and not worry about paying the bills and stuff. Like obviously you want to reach that point where there's a lot less stress and all that stuff, but man, I just want to stay busy for the rest of my life. I want to keep doing work I love, plain and simple.
Yeah, and I think you actually just said something really important there. Whereas you're aiming for something and not running away from something.
Yeah, or just constantly checking my watch, you know, for when the shift ends, you know, whether it's today or, you know, when the shift ends in 30, 40 years. It's like if you're in that position, like something's wrong. It's like Steve Jobs said, and this isn't an exact quote, but it's from his 2005 Stanford address. And if you haven't listened to that, I would highly recommend it. Go and YouTube that. But he says something to the extent of, if you wake up too many mornings, you look at yourself in the mirror and you're just like, I really do not want to do what I'm supposed to do today, then it's time to make a change. And I don't think you're ever too young or too old to do that. And mind you, like it's scary, obviously, but you kind of you have to accept that, and you have to live with this philosophy of you're giving up security for freedom, because it's hard to have one or the other. And again, this is something you could probably take political, but you know, my whole life has been about giving up, you know, momentary or immediate security in order for freedom. And like, I think it's Gary Vaynerchuk says, you know, living like no one else now, so you can live like no one else later. So, and that's my dog.
Well, okay, so yeah, that makes perfect sense. You're just trying to structure your own life, but it's not even necessarily. I don't even know if it's necessarily security these people are making decisions based off of. Maybe it's the idea that they don't trust themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You have to trust yourself to step out and do something on your own, you know? And that's one thing. When my wife and I, we were discussing her starting her own business and doing things for working for herself, we were talking about it, and I was like, well, yeah, you can do it. I trust you. And I think that made a big impact on why she was able to start and start putting forth the effort. I think that took a big weight off of her, is because it's like, yeah, I trust you. I know you can do this. I don't have any doubt in the world that you're gonna do it. So yeah, do it. And I think that's really important.
I love that.
So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's also practical ways that you can mitigate a lot of this, you know. I mean, it may take a little bit longer, but if you're really resolved to step outside your comfort zone, like quit your job and try something, I mean, you can start out by just making it a little side hustle and just do it on weekends and nights and very, very early mornings. I know lots of people that are at that stage right now. And if you start to see traction, you know, you can kick it up a notch and, you know, save enough money. I don't care if it takes you a few months or a year, but, you know, save enough money to give yourself a bit of a runway. And at that point you can quit your job and start working on this thing, what was a side hustle, you know, full time, and still have this peace of mind, like, okay, like I have some room to make mistakes here, to learn how to trust myself, to work on my abilities here, and I can still pay the bills. There's ways to mitigate that. I think it may take some planning, and some intention, and you've got to want it. And I mean, I'll just tell you from personal experience, it's like, it has only been, again, I'm just turning 29. It's only been the last 2 years really that all the stuff that I've been doing for the last decade has started to come to some sort of fruition. Prior to that, like only in the last couple of years that things I can say have gotten a little bit easier. We're making a little bit more money. We're living a little bit more comfortably. We have a little bit more freedom. Prior to that, it was, over 5 years that is just like, sometimes it was hell, right? But looking back, those really, really tough periods, and there has been some doozies, like, let me tell you, they temper you, they make you who you are, and you can learn from those, and they just make you a better person.
Right. Now, I want to talk about your podcast a little bit, because I think you actually have one of the more important podcasts out there. And I know you're going through some transitions right now. I know there's some transition now, but there's some really good episodes in the past. I just told you the other day, what was it? Was the guy's name Damien Ford? I'm really bad with names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damien's a boss, man.
That was my favorite. Like, I guess maybe because it touched on the things I'm reading right now on branding and marketing and this, that, and the other. But that was my favorite so far. And you also spent some time, you and I have spent time outside of the group and just chatted about, different things as far as, and you've been really helpful with different aspects and pointing me in the right direction. So I want to thank you publicly for that as well. But
always, man, always there to help out a fellow podcaster, basically, and successful dropout. So
yeah, well, I mean, I tell people you're my friend. I don't want you to think it's weird or something, but I'm like, hey, that's my buddy. I know that guy.
No, dude, buddy. Hell yeah.
Yeah. When Fight Club came out, they had the single serving friends on the plane, right? Now you got virtual friends. So,
Yeah. I like it. I'm all in, man.
So, but I want you to tell everybody about your podcast and how you frame it. And I know you've talked a little bit about it being aimed at college dropouts, but to me it seems a little bit more intense than that. I'm not a college dropout. I never even attempted to go to college, right? So it seems a little bit more intense than you don't see the complexity around it, but there's a lot there that you're encompassing. And what you're really doing is you're talking to the ambitious, and you're, and because I didn't go to college because I didn't want to deal with more school. I was miserable in school, so I was just like, no, this isn't for me. This type of learning, this type of doing things, it's not the way, it doesn't work for my personality. So it's like you're talking to a specific type of person, but I think by saying you're talking to the dropout, even though that's kind of your brand, it's a little bit, it closes the walls a little bit. And I think you're talking to the ambitious.
You're dead on, essentially. And we realized that early on. It started a lot more niche. I would only interview people that had specifically dropped out of high school or college and specifically become entrepreneurs, started their own business. And that's all the community was for a while. And then it started, and I would recommend that for anybody who's starting any business, like start niche, like really, really niche down. A saying that I really like to put out there is it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond, basically. Really, really niche down, and then from there you can kind of build out. And so that's what SD was, and it quickly became apparent that there was all these other people that, they may not have dropped out of, formal education, but they dropped out of the 9 to 5, or they dropped out of this stigma that they had to be a stay-at-home mom and couldn't work a job at the same time. Like, all these people kind of came out of the woodwork, and they just resonated with the philosophy. And so I've worked really hard since to be very intentional about, like, hey, you don't actually, dropout doesn't stand for school dropout. It stands for basically a dropout from the status quo, a dropout from, the matrix, I guess, if you will. I mean, society as a whole is a really funny thing. We grow up very institutionalized. Most people do. And you're conditioned to think in certain ways. And I don't want to, I'm not really a conspiracy theorist. If people are listening to this, like, I don't get that crazy with it. It's just like, for instance, the permission versus freedom mentality. The way that you grow up with formal schooling and the entire system and the kind of pipeline you're put in from a kid onward, even into your 9 to 5 job, it conditions you to have this permission-based mindset, which essentially says, I can't do anything really significant, by myself without the approval of somebody who is more credentialed than I am. And you get this like all the way through from grade school into high school. It's like you can't progress on to the next grade or read the next textbook or learn this or that before you've, somebody who's more credentialed than you are has said, okay, you're good to go. You can do this now. And you get that, all the way up to your job. Versus a freedom mentality, which is what I sort of naturally grew up with. And I'm very grateful to my family for this, which is like, screw it. Like, I understand the game. Like, I get the rules, but like, I'm going to find a way or make one. I'm going to create my own rules. And you don't do this in like, so it's kind of this rebellious mentality, but you don't do it in, say a negative way. Like, you do it in a way that, I've always done it in a way that just inspires other people. They're like, oh my gosh, look at this guy who kind of beat the system in this way or that. And it means like you can think outside the box. Like, you can think differently about this. You can create your own game and get other people to join it and create your own rules around it. And so it's this way. The Successful Dropout is all about this mentality of thinking outside of the box. I constantly say, SD, it's for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those who dare to dream and act on their dream despite what, those around them say. And so you can apply this to a multitude of different things in your life. And so that's what the show really started in the community, started to morph into. It's like, like I said, we've got a gal in there that was a single mom, and she got in the group and was just like, hey, like, I love being a single mom, or not. I don't actually know if she was a single mom, but she was a stay-at-home mom. And she's like, I love doing this, but I also want to work. Like, I have these things I want to pursue. And she's like, how do I do that? I want to be at home with my kids, but I also can't go to work and do both at the same time. And it's like, okay, we need to think outside of the box. And she'd never heard of just, and you of course are familiar with this, being a VA and being a virtual assistant. And so now she makes like $3,000 a month just being a virtual assistant, working at home, like with her kids. And so like that qualifies that to, the, like Cameron, I believe is his name, Zoob. Dang it. Sorry, dude, if you're out there listening, I can't remember. Here's this high schooler that just thought outside the box, saw something that was working and just did it in a new and better way. There's this saying that different is better than better. And this kid is like, he dropped out of high school, not even like 20 yet, and just making hundreds and thousands of dollars. And so there's just a large spectrum there, but I hope that kind of encapsulates what the show and the community is all about. And really, at the end of the day, everything Successful Dropout is takes its root in I guess myself and my approach towards the world. It's this mentality, and I've just tried to, I guess, imbue or embody myself, whatever, into this community And it's amazing how many people have just caught on and caught the vision. It's exciting to see you, man, like with the Stranger Encounters podcast and all the stuff that you guys are doing right now. It's taking the risk, thinking outside the box, and doing things that make your friends and family be like, what are you doing? But, if you keep at it and you're intentional and you're smart, it's like the mid to long term consequences of that are just so positive, and you'll have all your friends and family just being like, how when they're just still stuck in the rat race, they're still on the conveyor belt, and you've stepped off the conveyor belt.
Right. Well, and yeah, conveyor belt. I always call like the school system an assembly line. It's designed around the industrialized world. Well, we're in a different world now, and so you got to kind of adjust to it. And I think I heard somebody say a while back, and I can't put my finger on who it was, but they said before the Industrial Revolution, 80% of Americans were self-employed. And after the Industrial Revolution, it was something like 15% of Americans were self-employed. Well, I think with the technological revolution that we're involved in, and I think it's still in its infancy, even though technology's been, computers and the internet, it's been going for a while now. I still think it's in the infancy as far as finding the potential of what individuals can do. But I think we're getting back to a position to where 80% of people are going to be self-employed. And I think that what you do with your podcast is you're opening people's eyes up to the fact that, I can do something, and this technology that's available at my fingertips is a tool I can use like no other tool's ever been available before to do things that I never thought I was going to be able to do.
Oh, it's absolutely an incredible tool. You nailed it. I forgot to ask you, have you had Stephen Worley on the show?
I have not. No.
Stephen?
No, I'll have to get with him.
Remind me, I can introduce you after this, because he is like, this is what he does. This subject of the future of work, future of careers. He would be a really, really good guest to have on the show. I've had him on 2 or 3 times now, I think. But yeah, just technology. You were talking about, history a little bit and stuff, just in terms of, say, so I look at colleges and I look at them and I look at them as, and I think Isaac Morehouse kind of coined this term, credentialing factories. It's basically a bunch of people looking at you and saying, this person has studied all these subjects and accomplished all of these things. And so we as credentialed people are going to credential them and say they are now certified to go out into the world and have a job and do all this stuff. Way back in the day, before internet and all this technology, where you went to college was such an important thing, because say somebody went to Harvard and then you graduate from there and you go and approach an employer. As the employer, the only real reference you have to know like what that person has been through, what they've accomplished, and the kind of things that they're capable of is talking to Harvard. And so that's why, because you have this standard, of people that, well, Harvard has this standard, right? Like people have to get these kinds of grades and study these sorts of things, and everybody knows that. And so if, as an employer looking at somebody, back in the day, you really wanted to pay attention to where they went to school for some reason, because then you can reasonably expect like what that person's capabilities are, if that makes sense. Nowadays, you're talking about using the technology as like a tool. That's why college is continually becoming more and more obsolete, is because it is more than possible now to credential yourself. And so the term I like to use for this is auto credentialing or direct credentialing, or I guess you could say, instead of like third party credentialing. But I encourage everybody, for instance, in our community, if you haven't yet, at least start a personal website, figure out how to do that, firstandlastname.com, and start showcasing your work. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you've never held a real job in your life, if you just studied, like showcase the stuff that you've studied. And let that be a resume. And so we've got some members in our community that have these amazing personal pitch decks, and they've never gone to college, because at the end of the day, more and more employers, and I just heard like Apple and all these other companies are dropping all their requirements on degrees, and it's a trend I've seen coming for a very, very long time, because people are starting to realize, like, yeah, it's kind of this really obsolete concept now. The problem is most people, they don't know how to effectively showcase their experience and their knowledge and their skills to, say, if you're looking for a job, to the workforce or to potential employers. But the internet and the kind of technology we have, and it's just going to increase, is an incredible tool for that. And I would say the best place to start, like, get a LinkedIn profile, start a website, start writing, like start creating something. I don't care if it's a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel. Just start something. And I mean, that was the way that I was able to get to the position I'm at, is because my partners now in these businesses I'm involved in looked, and they can see, they looked at Successful Dropout. I remember specifically asking him, like, why me? We hadn't talked in like a year and a half. I basically forgotten about this guy, and he reached out and said, I have this opportunity. I want you to join our company. And I was like, why me? And he's like, well, I saw Successful Dropout. I was on the show way at its genesis, and I saw you kept up with it, and you were consistent. And obviously I talk about my other businesses and stuff on the show and stuff. And so he saw all that. It was there showcased online for everybody to see. And that's what ultimately got me to where I am today. I mean, my degree doesn't matter at all. And case in point, my wife actually has a degree, and we're actually still paying that off. She had a degree in health and wellness. She went to some pretty expensive schools, and we were just really young and naive back then. And so it's like, in total, it was like $60,000. And it's this worthless piece of paper, because without this degree, she didn't use it or showcase it to anybody at all. Like, she owns a juice bar and a yoga studio and is doing all these things she's always wanted to do, but never needed the degree for it. And because we were naive, we're just stuck paying for it, right? But, it's just it's a pretty amazing time we're in. And I think that most people, especially younger people, are just now starting to catch up to, the kind of habits and mentality that are required in this new, I guess, career landscape. And I think college is slowly dying.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And then you have these quote unquote dangerous voices out there like you that are speaking out and giving people alternative methods of education. You have websites like Skillshare.com. You have Thaddeus Russell. I don't know if you know who he is. He got fired, so he starts his own university, and he talks about the accreditation process all the time. Then you had Brian Kaplan. Have you heard him?
From like Kaplan University?
No. Brian Kaplan is an economics professor at George Mason University. And
I haven't heard of him, no.
He wrote a book. He just came out, I think earlier this year or late last year. And I haven't read it yet. It's on my to read list. I always say I have a list of about 380,000 books I have to read. And it's called The Case Against Education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about guerrilla education. He's like, you can go to Harvard without paying a dime. You just won't get the certificate at the end of it. You can sit there for 4 to 6 years and learn whatever you want to learn. They're not going to kick you off the campus. They're just not going to give you the certificate when it's all said and done. But if you take the time to do that and you show the initiative, what's to say that the professor that you're sitting in the class with doesn't write you a letter of recommendation or something like this, you know? So, you know, people are finding ways to bypass this system that's been the traditional system, and they're being successful doing it. So I think it's really important to spread this news, because some people don't have the same opportunity as far as access. You know, I don't remember who it was I said, but they were talking about like Harvard and Princeton and all these Ivy League schools, and they were like, all these guys went to the same Ivy League schools. They all went to the same prep schools. They're all the same people all through generation after generation after generation. You're not getting any new blood in here. So other people have to find other ways to outmaneuver these people. We have to get creative, and we have to outmaneuver them. And, you know, now there's so many tools to do this, and so many ways to expand your knowledge. You don't have to have access to Harvard to get a Harvard education, you know?
Right. No, I mean, kind of along those same lines. It's been a while since I had him on the show. I believe it's Eric Barker is his name. A very popular blogger. He put out a post, and his sort of niche, I guess, is every article he puts out, it's been meticulously researched by like professional researchers, scientists and stuff. So the stuff he puts out and the ideas he asserts are always very, very well backed up, which is what can make them so controversial sometimes. And so one of the things that he puts out is, and it went viral and was really controversial. It was a study that he and his team did, and it was like they studied a bunch of valedictorians and found out that valedictorians, although they are generally successful, you know, they get well-paying careers, they, you know, get the house, 2 cars, nice family, all that stuff, that virtually none of them go on to start like multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar businesses, even though they're valedictorians. And it was just this big controversial thing. And so I actually had him on the show, and we talked about that. And it was really interesting. And it's because they've grown up in a system, and they've learned how to, you know, essentially work with and game the system to be successful, like within this system, but to not think outside the box enough to really create or build anything that, like as Steve Jobs would say, like puts a dent in the universe, you know, or, you know, really, really has a huge impact. Like, it's like they have good careers and stuff like that, but you're not going to find them running, you know, multi-million-dollar companies, or at least very, very few of them. And it's a really interesting thing when you look at those numbers.
Something psychological in the way that people operate, because okay, and this might, you played music for a while there. You said you played in a few bands, and you listen to nearly the same style of music I do. You like the heavier style of music. All right,
all day, man.
So you look at, all right, like, so let's take a band like Metallica, okay? And it's like they hit a certain point in their career, and then all their music started falling off. It's like they lost that hunger, right? And I kind of relate that whole idea to the kid that grew up rich, right? And they don't have any reason to really get out there and innovate and do and think outside the box, because they kind of have this road paved for them. But then you have a band that came up at the same time as Metallica. You have Megadeth, and the style of music, it to me, like, I think the last album I heard by Megadeth was 13 a couple of years back, and it was a really, really good album. And you can hear that Dave Mustaine is constantly tweaking his guitar work. You can hear that his personality, he's becoming more humble and understanding more how to be a bandmate, because you know anything about Dave Mustaine, he's gone through more band members than there are bands out there, and that's to say a lot.
Was he the one that was he originally a part of Metallica?
He was originally a part of Metallica, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
So it's like he still has this hunger, this fire burning inside of him to do better. every time, right? And in Metallica, it feels like after the Black Album, they lost that, you know? And I think
Yeah.
I think it's related. You can look at almost every major band and you see the same thing. They hit this pinnacle and then all of a sudden it ends, you know? I guess with Guns N' Roses, it was the Use Your Illusion. Might have been Lies, Lies, Lies before that, you know? But there's this like pinnacle these bands hit and then they just start dropping off. And you turn around and you're like, what happened to you? Like, really, what happened to you? And I think the same thing can be said about somebody who hits a lot of success is they eventually lose that, whatever it was that helped them create what got them to stardom. They lose that fire because they don't need it anymore. It's not a necessity. And then if you look at somebody, like you said, this 20-year-old kid who just thought differently. He didn't like come up with something new. He just thought a little different. And now he's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, you know? Well, you know, this kid probably had something ignited within him and he's like, school's not getting me where I want to go. I got to figure it out on my own. And he went out there and he did it, you know? And there's something to be said about a person that has all the chips stacked against them. That person, people like the underdog story, but the underdog wins a lot of times. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, they're motivated. No, I think that's a fantastic point. I mean, there's been plenty of people that come on the show, and a lot of them, you know, have been, for instance, immigrants, and you know, came from just a not so great background, and it's amazing to see how many really successful people have come from that sort of background. And so, you know, it could be controversial, but I know that there's all this stuff. You know, there's all these, you know, they call it the oppression Olympics, and all these people, you know, all over talking about, you know, woe is me, I'm oppressed in this way and that, you know, and I try to stay, you know, I used to really get into it more and really be interested in politics, I think a lot more than I am now. But one of the first things I'd ever tell those people is like, look, statistically, you probably have a better chance of creating something great than some kid who's just grown up with a silver spoon, right? I mean, you need to channel this in the right way. You can't have that mentality. Like, I don't care if somebody dropped you $100,000 in your bank account today. With that mentality, you're not going to turn that into anything substantial or long lasting. You're not going to build wealth with that. And so it is amazing to see. That is definitely a trend I noticed with the people I interviewed, is typically the people that came from a harsher background. They had more of a reason to, I guess, get out of there, and more of a motivation to build something great, and more of a drive, which is something, you know, I didn't grow up definitely, you know, we definitely weren't poor. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I do remember some conversations he'd sit us down and be like, so look, you're all going to get like one gift for Christmas this year. You know, it's like, you know, we've definitely been through some of that, but like I grew up with means, I would say. And there's been several times, like, I have definitely not minded being on my own and being in some of these tougher situations, because or for instance, you know, being in the military and stuff, just getting beat down, absolutely beat down, because I know it sucks in the moment, but it's good for me. We do better now, but man, it's like whenever I get ungrateful or start to slow down and feel a little bit unmotivated, I just think back a few years ago, and it's like, remember that time we were almost bankrupt? We were basically looking at losing everything, and some people hated us because we owed them money, and like all this stuff. There's some crazy stories, man. It's just like, I am so glad I'm not in that situation. I'm very grateful for where I am now, and I'm going to keep striving to make sure I'm never in that situation again. And you can't underestimate that.
It seemed like up until about a year ago, I repeated the same phrase at least weekly. And it's like, I don't work this damn hard to be so damn broke.
Right.
You know, I don't put so much into it just so I have nothing. Like, why do I even bother? If I'm going to have nothing, then I shouldn't even bother. But I just stuck with it, man. I just kept grinding. It was just, it was just about survival at times.
Hmm. Yeah. And those times, like, I look at, I'm not even 30 yet. I guess I got a year now, but, yeah, life is good. And obviously entrepreneurship it's still a roller coaster. Like, last week we had some stuff happen and it sucked. But I look forward at the next several seasons of my life, the next few decades, and it's like, I know those times are going to come again. There could very well come a day when I bet most of what I have and take a risk to build something else and lose it. And I might have to start from ground zero again. It's not over. It will never be over. And you just got to be prepared for that and approach those times with a really positive mentality. And my sort of overarching philosophy on this, and I say this to myself every single day, every day, is life is always happening for me, not to me, even in those really tough times. How can I take this negative experience? How is it a positive experience? How is that good? And just, if there's one book I could recommend to people on this show, it would be, damn it. Why can't I think of the art? No, not, it's thinking, hold on. Let me bring my Audible up. No, come back. I forgot the author. I always forget this guy's name. Oh, yeah. So if there is one book that I'd recommend to people listening to this, it'd be As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
Okay.
It's a really quick read. It's like, if you're listening to it on Audible, it's like an hour long, but it just speaks to your thoughts and the words you say. And those are more impactful and more important than you can comprehend. And so would highly recommend that book. I've listened to it probably, 20, 30 times.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. I read a book. It was a few years back, and it was Malcolm McDowell, I think is his name, and it was called Outliers.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting read. I think that book changed my perspective on more things than almost anything. Just the way he lays out the different statistics and this, that, and the other, and the way that society has grown and how it's shifted, and it was a really interesting read. I gave it to a buddy of mine. I was like, dude, you got to read this. This is really cool. Really
Yeah,
cool
he has
perspective.
two other books of his are called Blink and then The Tipping Point, and I'd highly recommend those two. They're just as good.
Oh, really? Okay. I've heard of The Tipping Point, but I've never read it. That is one that I should put on my list. I'm reading Bob Bly at the moment. I can't
Which
remember
book is
the
that?
yeah something. He's written what 98 books or something like that.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. He's a marketer, an online marketer. He writes copy. He writes sales letters. He writes advertisements. He does email.
Oh, yeah.
He draws up websites, and so this is his book on putting together a freelance business and the way that you structure a freelance career.
Gotcha. So basically right in line with everything you guys are doing. That's great.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I'm going to take, because, I've always liked writing and I've always written fiction and poetry and this, that, and the other. So what I'm doing is I'm refocusing my writing talents to writing sales copy for my wife's business, and that's going to be my contribution to what's happening and us moving forward.
Heck yeah, dude. That's amazing.
Yeah, at
I'm
least in the
reading.
beginning.
Yeah. No, that's great. No, I remember you sent me some of the copy too, and it was well written. I do remember that. So you've got certainly a talent there. Do you are you reading any biographies or anything?
At the moment, no, and I don't see. I have to keep my reading down because being a truck driver, I can get ahead of myself on the reading. So I will listen to audio books while driving because I'm usually driving 10 plus hours a day. And so I read probably about 45 minutes in the evening before I go to bed, and maybe 20, 30 minutes in the morning after I've had a couple of cups of coffee. But for the most part, I focus on one book at a time. Unless I'm listening, I'll listen to my podcast. I'll listen to audiobooks and things like that during the day. So if you have some decent biographies to suggest, I would definitely look into it.
Yeah, I'm reading the Everything Store right now, which is about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and so
Oh,
there's
that's
several
topical.
I would definitely recommend that. That would be yeah, that would be one of them. I went, and if you're familiar with ayahuasca at all, I did a whole episode on this, but I went and did my first ayahuasca retreat several months back, and long story short, had an amazing experience. But one of the things I walked away with was that I needed to read more biographies, essentially. And so I picked up a bunch, and I'm into this one now, about through to chapter 2, and it's fantastic. The other one would be Shoe Dog, about Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. That's just a fascinating one, and honestly makes you. I mean, you look at these giant founders, these billionaires, these billion-dollar companies, and you don't get a good glimpse into all the things that went into creating what they have. And so reading, for instance, Phil Knight's story, I remember it just giving me so much encouragement because that dude struggled, man. I mean, for the first, it was like over 5 years of Nike. Like, even when they were starting to do really well, the guy still couldn't pay himself a salary and worked part-time, more than part-time as a CPA. And just struggle after struggle and barrier after barrier to get through. And I remember it making me feel so much better about my current situation. We were at a point where we were just facing a lot of obstacles, and it was like, do other people go through this too, or am I just like a really crappy entrepreneur right now? And so those biographies, man, they're so powerful.
Well, I think one of the most overlooked points about Jeff Bezos, and you probably have the numbers down a little bit better than I do, but I remember hearing that Amazon did not claim a profit for 10 years and was actually losing money for the first 10 years because he was actually investing more into the company than they were actually profiting. And so before Amazon
Yeah,
blew up into this insanely large corporation that it's become in the last 3 or 4 years, it spent most of its beginning of its life losing money because of how much they were reinvesting into the company. And I think that's something that people don't look at. It's like this guy was still trying to figure out a way to live day in and day out. He was still scraping by day in and day out because he was putting so much money back into his company.
yeah. I mean, it's a pretty common misconception. People see large companies like that I guess aren't. Well, they're in the startup space, and especially like these fast growth companies like Amazon. It's not really an uncommon thing, because you kind of have a choice. If you are a company like that, and there is just an enormous amount of potential, then typically a good choice is to basically sacrifice profits now for rapid growth, because you're basically investing everything you've got. Every dollar you make is going into growth. And some of these companies, yeah, like Amazon, just aren't profitable for for years. And so if they decided to, they could, like, my point is they could have taken profits earlier, but they may not be as big and have as much of a monopoly as they do now if they would have done that. It's kind of the trade-off. They can take some profits earlier, make maybe some more people happy, but sacrifice the rapid growth, or they can work towards that rapid growth and sacrifice the profits in the meantime. And then, of course, long term, it's like they can flip a couple switches and it's just tons and tons of profit, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I just I think it's worth talking about, those types of things, and I think it's also worth expressing about the opportunity that Amazon gives entrepreneurs to start their own business for relatively low overhead.
Oh yeah, I did it. I did Amazon FBA.
Yeah, right.
It's an incredible opportunity. It's a legit business model, and I think personally it's a little saturated, but again, if you jump in, you work hard and you think differently, there's definitely still a lot of opportunity there. And yeah, they're a good example of they have done really well, and people can look at them all they want as like this evil corporation, this giant monopoly, but it's like they're also a really smart company that we're constantly buying things off Amazon. Like we don't go shopping anymore. We just go online. We have an Amazon Prime membership and we just do it that way. Like they have provided so much value. I mean, some of our servers are with Amazon. We buy our products, everything from like pills to food and clothing through Amazon. And they have the infrastructure and the systems in place. You can start your own business, like selling private label products and doing arbitrage and all this stuff, drop shipping through Amazon. It's incredible what they've been able to build. And so,
I'm with you though. I have a Prime membership myself.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And I'm looking forward to, the wide adoption of drones here soon. I'm looking forward to the day I can order something and have a drone like deliver it to me within 24 hours.
That'd be nice. Well, all right, man. Well, I'm going to shut down the podcast now. And I want to give you a chance to plug everything and let people know where to find you. I know we have plenty of more we can talk about. We still haven't gotten to all the businesses that you're involved in at the moment. But that can be a teaser for another show, and we can do this again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Tommy. And for people listening, successfuldropout.com is the best place to find me. We've got a forum on there, Facebook group, a really active community, the podcast, of course, and of course that leads to pretty much everything else I'm doing. So successfuldropout.com. We'll see you there.
Yes, check out successfuldropout.com. It's one of my favorite podcasts. It's one of my favorite groups to be involved with. And thank y'all all for listening. This was Stranger Encounters with Kylon Geinger. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.
Tearing deeper than my skin. Faded eyes can't see true